to the why do top 10 financial institutions trust JFrog? Probably first start off with who I am. My name is William Manning, or you can just call me Bill. I'm one of the senior solution architects over here. I'm also the solution engineering manager currently for small medium business, channel partners, and integrations. Today is going to be a very interesting, exciting topic that I get really psyched about, which is, of course, why, right? And we're going to touch on a lot of different topics in today's discussion. We're going to be talking about basically how to protect yourself, the scary numbers, everything down to like security from shift left all the way down to your runtime, all the way down to things such as ML ops going forward, right? Because we see that too. So we're actually going to touch upon some machine learning and AI going forward. So first of all, one of the things that we always have, and I always like to do, is I always like to start my discussions, especially when discussing something as important as the financial industry and every software industry at that. It's not just financial, it's others. But financially, since we're talking today, I like to start with the scary numbers, right? These are just some of the stats that you see, in 2023. The thing is that security incidents are starting to fall. Right, because I think customers are becoming more and more aware of companies are becoming actually more and more aware of the potential threats and how they can protect themselves. There are a multitude of tools in the market, but when you're looking for an end-to-end solution, that's why you should come to JFrog, and we'll discuss that. But the thing is that one of the things that we're trying to help companies do is reduce the actual financial burden, the actual loss of revenue. The thing is, one of the things I always talk about is when I look at especially a number like this, when we talk about things like data breaches, yeah, financial losses are one thing, but reputational losses are another. You can gain finances back over time, but gaining your reputation back is always so much harder. And the thing is that when we look at this, we look at how much money financial institutions are losing every year just on data breaches alone. It is insane. And the thing is that last year, alone, there were over 232 million individual records affected by breaches. And these breaches and stuff can all be mitigated and maintained, but just by taking the normalized security precautions. Now, we're not talking about like your infrastructure on how you're hosting it or things like that. But the actual software you produce, the things that you create, that you can control and mitigate the potential loss and risk around that loss. And that's the thing is we're going to talk today about those kind of tool sets. And we're also going to be discussing on how you can automate these, because the thing is, the more that you automate, the better it is, right? Humans we're fallible, right? That's just who we are. And by automating these things, it allows you to take the human factor slightly out of it and have it so that it's a little bit more robotic in a way, right? So it actually becomes more of a thing that happens as opposed to a thing that you have to do. And the thing is that when we look at this, the more you automate, the better the increased saving is over time, both financially and also risk-wise. Because in most institutions, one of the things is a scary number, in my opinion, is the ratio that I'm showing here. Usually it's 100 developers, to 10 DevOps engineers or, operational engineers to one security person. Think about that. That ratio is pretty insane. And the thing is that your security people are usually heavily overburdened. They're constantly fighting an uphill battle. And this uphill battle that they're fighting causes you to miss things, right? These are things that you can address easily by automating, by reducing the burden, reducing things like root cause analysis reports, which take time away from your efforts of actually trying to solve something because you're investigating it. But by automating more, it allows your security people, allows your DevOps engineers, allows your developers to do what they do and not just leave the burden to a single security engineer, in this ratio of 10, 100 to 10 to 1. What it actually does is it makes everybody conscious of those security components, like their job, they're part of the machine. So by delegating out these responsibilities with the proper platform can really increase your ability to go in and protect your organization more succinctly, more securely, thus making sure you don't have loss of revenue or worse, loss of reputation. So when we look at a software supply chain that we have here, get everything from left to right, right? Public repositories that are used for those third-party transitive dependencies that the developer needs to build their code, the source control management, through things like GitHub and Bitbucket, whatever. Your CI servers, pull from those same resources of those public repositories. You build software, you release software, you distribute software. Well, the problem with this is that all those open source packages that you're using as part of this, besides the coding aspects, we'll talk about SaaS later, but all those packages you're using actually open you up to threats. Everything from malicious packages, bringing in any potential threats and malicious packages that we can actually help you, defend yourself against, 0-day issues from CVE. We see them all the time. Come on, everybody in this world remembers when Log4j, erupted onto the world and everybody went crazy. And just so you're aware, by the way, before that Log4j issue came out, for months, they were actually sending out information and warnings through CVE saying, hey, by the way, just so you know, Log4j is under investigation. And it was like yelling into the Grand Canyon with nobody inside. Nobody listened. And then when it happened, the whole world went on fire. Same thing with things like the SolarWinds, right? The biggest one that affected everybody, that drove everybody crazy, because of the fact it affected over 10,000 corporations, including people like the DoD, DHS, Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, and a bunch of other institutions in EMEA and APAC. The thing is that was a fifth level transitive dependency in the software that SolarWinds actually deployed that caused the issue. CVEs, right? Vulnerabilities and exposures. You can't get away from this, right? We are a CNA, and we are actually creating CVEs and enhancing data to make it better for you as an organization to attack these. Secret management. Oh my God, I can't even start to even, talk about this. I mean, we ran with our software, we could detect secrets. We ran millions of containers off of Docker Hub through our X-ray product with our advanced security, which we'll talk about in a bit. And when we did that, we found millions of access tokens, API keys, you name it. It's amazing how many secrets accidentally get exposed that could leave your organization to vulnerability and accessibility and threats, right? Misconfigurations. Oh my God, this is another one. The thing is one of the things that we look for is application service level exposures. If you're using something like Nginx, did you remember to enforce TLS? Things like that, right? Making sure that the stuff that you use on a regular basis doesn't fall by the wayside, even if it's an easy software component that you've always been using. If it hasn't been configured correctly, how do you know what's going to be fixed, right? The binaries, these are things like that you create. We talk about JFrog and Artifactory. The whole thing is we're the universal binary repository manager. Yeah, there's actually tamper abuse that can happen. How do you ensure that the stuff that you're utilizing is true, right? We have things like dependency confusion, right? Or typo squatting, where you do an E before I in a library name, and somebody out there created a library with that has something malicious in it that takes the information and propagates it somewhere else for somebody to utilize. And lastly, production issues, right? Attacks, DDoS attacks, you name it, they're out there, right? Now, in terms of that's more of a burden on you, but if you configure and you build your software correctly, it can reduce that, saving you money in the long run. Because the thing is, all of these portions are potential attack vectors that are meant to disrupt your company and are meant to expose you for financial burden or just for glory, right? Remember, a lot of attackers out there aren't out there to make finance on this. They're just out there for the win. So the thing is that Gartner has actually even done reports on this. By 2027, 75% of the organizations will have, switched from point solutions to platforms, right? And that's the thing is, we've been doing this for a long time. There's, like I said, we're not the sexiest product, but we're the best base foundation you can have for your organization to do this end to end. And the thing is that actually there was a report done by Forrester. We got a 393% return on investment for our product, right? We helped save 156 hours per developer. 30% of the time reduced in OSS security, and the investment came back in under 6 months. Think about that, right? That's the thing. And the thing is experts all over the place, completely agree with this. The idea of standardizing on a standard platform. So this way it reduces it. The thing is that DevOps and DevSecOps have grown organically over time, right? And the thing is a lot of teams have taken various solutions that work for them. What happens then is that we talk to a lot of these companies and they say, we have like 17 different solutions that we use because this team chose this team chose that, this team chose this, because it met their needs at the time because there was no standard. By having a platform, going more towards a platform engineering approach, we see things like reduction into tool sets, consolidation. Some people call it, what do they call it? Digital transformation. I mean, I've heard all the multitudes of terms, but it comes down to this. Standardize the development practices across your organization from where the developer is all the way down to your production will save you time, money, and effort. Also accountability, right? The thing is by having a single source of truth through your organization, it allows you to go ahead and proceduralize and attack the issues in a better manner. It just, trust me, it's much better to do this. And like I said, here's information on it. Thing is, as the tooling grows, by standardizing your base, it helps drive your efficiency going forward. So if we're looking at the software supply chain, this is your standard software supply chain. You code, you build, and you deploy. Now with JFrog, first of all, we should talk about Artifactory, right? So Artifactory is the cornerstone of our technology, right? It's where we started back in 2008. We were, basically the first one to the game in this. And this is your single source of truth. It supports over 32 package types. It's designed for multi-region, multi-cloud, hybrid approaches and deployments. But the biggest thing is it helps maintain and manage that 85 to 90% of OSS components that you use. On top of that, it's also a way to manage your SDLC, your software development lifecycle. It allows you to have dev, QA, staging, and production, and produce builds, publish those builds. But when you publish those builds, you're not just publishing information around the build, you're publishing information around how it was created, what was used to create it, building a source of record. On top of that, you can use our promotion API to promote your binaries through the cycle, your builds through the cycle, dev, QA, staging, and production, and accumulate as much data as you want. So this way, when you look at a build, you understand everything about it in a centralized location. Now that's when you're doing your build and release management, right? We even have a thing called a release bundle, which is a way to package up things like web services, where you might have like a Docker image, a bunch of Docker images, a Helm chart, and some Terraform, treat it as a singular service, and even promote that through its own cycle, right? It allows you to have that system of record, the accountability that you need as an organization to standardize so that you can reduce a lot of the cost. But let's talk about things like shift left. We're going to talk today about a bunch of different things. So number one, first of all, we have X-ray, right? We're going to talk about X-ray in a bit. X-ray is our scanning product. Now, one of the things you should understand is where we differ from everyone else when it comes to Artifactory and X-ray. And the reason why I'm going to say this is that we store the libraries and any of the binaries inside of Artifactory as a checksum, meaning that we use a metadata approach to maintain, manage all the stuff that you store there. Well, that same metadata is used by our X-ray product, which is our security, vulnerability, license compliance, and operational risk tool. And the difference between us and any other tool in the market is all the other tools are action-based, meaning you have to perform something to get something back. It means it's an extra step in what you do. X-ray and Artifactory, there's symbiosis between them, because it's based on metadata and the fact that we are a CNA supplying the latest information for vulnerability, exposure, and other data, is that it's a metadata to metadata comparison. It means that it's consistent, it's constantly, it's always scanning, it's always doing this. So behind the scenes, Artifactory and X-ray are always working together to ensure safety and security. But like I said, if you want to start off and discuss the way you want to do the process, first start off with your developers. They are your front line. They are your foot soldiers. They are the ones that are going to defend you the most by building the most reliable and safe software. So from a shift left perspective, we offer a couple of things. First of all, X-ray alone can go ahead and pre-evaluate libraries, both implicit direct transitive dependencies that your developers stated, and all the indirect transitive dependencies that your developers rely on for those dependencies. They can pre-evaluate them as they come in. If they meet your criteria that you define as a company, they can be released to the developer. But in addition to that, giving them the safety and the knowledge that they need to do their job is super important. So an example of this is that we offer some tool sets. Some of the tool sets we offer are things like IDE plugins, Now, the IDE plugins, they're invaluable. This allows your developers to go ahead and attack the situation firsthand. This means this is your lowest point of entry. So if we were to look at something like this, here's my IDE as a developer. And when I'm looking at this, I can go in and look at any of the CVEs that I have, and also look at ways for me to go ahead and remediate them and have all the information I need right where I need them. But also too, being able to go in there and actually, as the developer, also look at things such as, am I injecting any potential information into the system? One of the things we also have is the ability for you to go in and look to see if things are running in debug mode. Or, here's an example of a command injection. And one of my favorite things is that we allow your developers to see where any potential threat might be coming into the organization and where the exposure itself happens, and what they can do about it to fix it more succinctly, so rapidly being able to attack it. But we also bring the same set of information down to the developer if they're using, say, a CLI tool like ours, where we can go ahead and expose all the potential security threats and risks so that your developers can go ahead and attack it most. When we start talking about the build process, right? When you start going through your CI down to your runtime, down to your CD, X-Ray and Artifactory provide things like static code analysis in our advanced features, contextual analysis, which I'll show you in a bit. That's actually one of my favorites. Also, too, with X-Ray, you get software composition analysis, and we're also going to be introducing runtime, where if you're using Kubernetes, we can even detect the vulnerability to say, hey, by the way, in this node, in this pod right now, in this container, there's a vulnerability you're going to want to go in and address. In addition to that, we also provide the security so when you are deploying your software, whether to your customers, a web service, or an IoT device, we actually have many different ways in which you can utilize the stuff before down to the stuff you deploy, right? So the stuff you manufacture and to the stuff that goes into production. Because we actually go ahead and enable an end-to-end solution in this case, you can go ahead and have security throughout your entire SDLC. And the thing is, it's OpenAI, right? So it's all you can configure it to work in the way that you build your software. You don't have to adhere to our standards, but we provide standards in which you can go ahead and utilize to make your organization that much better. So with X-Ray and Artifactory, when you use our standard X-Ray, you get things like software bill of materials, which we'll talk about in a minute. You get license compliance and governance, right? Being able to reject or look at licensing that only is for your organization. And one of the nice features of this, by the way, is that sometimes this is an indicator of typo squatting and binary spoofing. One of my favorite topics I like to talk about is operational risk. It's the most underutilized feature. And most people don't even think about this in most respects. So actually, it's always better for me to show it. So what operational risk is that we did a study, and the study is that it's over 70% of the libraries that developers use online are old, outdated, or abandoned. Think about that. So if you have a library that might be a dependency, you find a bug and hasn't been updated since 2009, there's a good possibility that it's not going to be updated. So this allows you to go in and say, is this library end of life? How old is the library? Are the new versions available? And also, too, what's the health of the open source project? This can help you as an organization also mitigate risk. And the thing is that we also look for malicious packages, and we also, of course, look for CVEs, and I'll touch upon those in a minute. Our advanced security features are even cooler. So one of the things I'm going to show you today is it's called contextual analysis. And what contextual analysis is, it helps you delineate through the sheer magnitude and massive numbers of potential threats through CVEs and lets you know which ones are most relevant to you. And to do that, I'm actually going to go in and I'm going to show you a quick example. So let's go in here and I'm going to look at a Docker image just so you can understand. It's always good to throw through examples. And if you look here, I've got inside this Docker image, I have a series of vulnerabilities. And I have some exposures and stuff that we'll talk about in a minute. But let's go ahead and let's look at these vulnerabilities. Whenever I approach this to a customer, whenever I talk to them, I go, this container has 315 vulnerabilities. Now, these 315 vulnerabilities are for a point release. this release? What about the next release, right? Think about when you're developing, it's like being at the beach and getting hit by a wave, right? You hit by a wave, you stand back up, you're like, whoa, that was a big wave. Well, the other part of this is that another wave is coming, right? So how do you address the issues in between those waves? And I always ask customers, I have 315 vulnerabilities. How long is it going to take you just to investigate 315? So you're taking away resources. You're taking away your developers to go search to find out if this is the case. Now, the problem there is, too, is most of the time, these issues don't happen in direct transitive dependencies, the ones they've implicitly stated. It usually happens in the third, fourth, fifth level transitive dependencies. What contextual analysis does is it lets you know that in this case, out of these 315, over 75% of these are not applicable with 100% certainty. We take the information from the component, right, from the actual CVE, and this is a critical. We break it down and we say, hey, by the way, just so you know, it looks like these functions that are the ones that are nefarious aren't being used. So by that means is that you don't have to actually worry about it because you're not using the nefarious component. The first knee-jerk reaction would be to get rid of it, right? Well, you don't have to because it's not directly affecting you. But contextual analysis will also show you where you're being affected and how you can remediate it faster. And not only do we show it here in the UI, but we also bring it over here, right? So if I show you inside the developer's code, if you look here, you can see here's a CVE in my authentication.js. It's applicable. Here's the evidence behind it. Here's what you can do. Here's the research materials on why this is an issue. And we highlight the code so you can go attack it, right? This is where it matters most. Contextual analysis at the developer level, and not only having contextual analysis as part of the actual integration here. But we're also doing things like secret detection. Once again, secret detection is pretty awesome because you'd be surprised how much stuff we find out there. Everything from weak passwords, like in this case, even down to things like API keys. Here's a hard-coded secret, right? You're going to want to go and fix that because that could be a potential security threat. We're also finding things like application misuse, security configurations, and also infrastructure as code, things like Terraform. So just to kind of show you in this case, I'll show you an example of a service. Here's Nginx, right? Nginx is my primary interface for the application I'm hosting. And in this case, I'm not enforcing TLS. Or what if the fact I'm not actually enforcing CSP, right? I'm not enforcing a content policy. My God, right? These are potentially deadly threats that could actually affect my company. And on top of that, like I said, we also have things like Terraform, right? Where you can go in and I can look at any of these pieces. If you look in here, I can just go over here to my infrastructure as code. And if you look, you can see where, like, here's one. I'm not adopting my S3 bucket ACL, right? I have public access. So if somebody goes in and intercepts one of my calls to download something, they can get access to my S3 bucket. Now, the other thing too is that, this is just on the standard security side. Because we are limited on time, I'm going to jump to the next thing because this is when you're dealing with third-party transit dependencies and stuff. But I want to show you one more thing is it's not just also understanding those kind of dependencies, but by using our platform, actually, I'm going to go back a bit here. Let me get it down for a second. I'll show you an example. Here's a Docker image, right? That same Docker image we were looking at before. So first of all, I know where it is in the SDLC. I can also see how it was built. We link directly back to the CI tooling. But also, most cases, Docker is a black box in this case. And I can, if I'm running a Node front end and a Java backend like I am in here, not knowing what version I'm running can be hurtful. And I can go in here and not only see my dependencies, but in this case, with our Docker registry, which in my opinion is absolutely the best, I can see what versions of the applications I'm hosting. I can even go in here and diff between versions of applications. I can tell you if it was built differently. Did somebody, is it running slow because somebody left the debug flag on again? Nope, not in this case, okay? Right? You can see my X-ray data. I can hook this up to things like Jira. I can diff in, complete instances, right? Even down to the way it was created and when it was used to run it. I have its complete release history here. But one of the biggest things that we also solve is, let's go look at the, say, this front end I have here, is that one of the problems that we get from a lot of our customers when I talk to them is also ask, one of the biggest things is root cause analysis when something does go wrong, right? This in here allows you to do it. So I actually had a guy one time tell me that his root cause analysis took him days and weeks to compose an analysis on why an issue happened. I showed him some of these best practices, which I'm showing you right here, kind of touching on them. And he's like, 4 months later, we talked, and he's like, you now knocked it down to minutes and hours. Because let's say this UI is terrible. I can go in here and show you all the details on how it was built and how it was created. But more importantly, here's how it was built. And here's every container that we ever deployed into production that actually ran that application. Then I can even dive into the application itself, right? Here's the application I was hosting, and I can see its dependencies. And what if one of these dependencies is terrible? Like, I don't know what I just selected here, accepts.1.2.13. Well, if I asked you as a security person or a developer, well, where else have you used this? And you're going to have to do a lot of searching. Well, in here, I can go click on builds, and I can show you that, well, here's 9 builds that have used this version of the library. Once again, knocking down remediation time and being able to actually address issues and attack them where it matters most, saving you time, money. But let's talk about the next elephant in the room, right? AI ML ops. Because we now support Hugging Face and we will be supporting other large language model repositories in the future. And why is this important? Well, the thing is that AI, as you know, is exploding, right? It's happening. And there's all these tools now on the market that are now AI based, right? There's a lot of terminologies out there. But the thing is that no matter what these technologies are, no matter what these stacks that people are building and utilizing to do this, is one thing that's for certain, is the fact that MLOps is here, it's here to stay, and it's going to keep growing. But the thing is, too, it's a very Wild West mentality right now. So when we look at this, ML modeling now is part of the development lifecycle. And the thing is that all of these AI toolings need to they need to be fed, right? I always joke around, like, they need to be fed. So they need, they need large language models to adapt and build and learn. And Hugging Face is one of the public ones right now that we're using. If you're not familiar with it, just go to huggingface.co. But there, it's a massive community of machine learning models, and we have a Hugging Face repository, inside of, just so you're aware. If you're looking at local repositories, you can see we actually have a Hugging Face repository if you're building large language models. But the thing is though, they suffer from the same thing that is actually happening in terms of third-party transitive dependencies. These large language models are starting to come into question. Malicious types, malicious packages, things like that are now being embedded in some of these. So one of the things that we're helping do is that with the ML model management, we actually allow you to store the remote repository to the third-party ML, large language model sources. You go in, you do the things that you need to do, tune your model, and then you can publish your model back in. But our X-ray product too will go ahead and scan for malicious content inside of the models. It'll help standardize and also scan for licensing, right? So these are things that we're looking to actually do, and we're going to do more in the future. But this will let you know, you can go in and those regulatory requirements around licensing can now be applied to your ML model. Same thing with the malicious content scanning that we provide inside of the ML model. And the thing is that, the ML model is going to ride, correspondingly to the way that you're doing things. And the thing is, we see this more and more every time. I actually am doing a talk next week or at the end of the month. I think it's the 30th of January. I'm actually doing a talk on ML ops and models, on how you as a company can adopt them safely and securely, and how it's going to affect your CI/CD and your SDLC going forward. You're going to see more and more automation. You're going to see more and more tool sets happening. I'm actually working with a company right now that's doing that's integrating into our product. That's actually, it's a chat, it's basically GPG chat around SDLC. It's pretty cool. And the thing is that we actually give you a way to maintain and manage those models and make sure that they're safe and secure, right? So ingesting to train, tuning, refinement, published back into Artifactory for retention and security aspects on top.